Bedford has a population of over 150,000 as of 2019. The town was founded by the Anglo-Saxon people. The name Bedford is believed to derive from the name of a Saxon chief called Beda and a ford crossing the river Great Ouse. In 1166, during the reign of Henry II, Bedford became a borough, which entitled it to a political representation and granted it a merchant guild. In the Middle Ages, Bedford was established as a small historical town of Bedfordshire and a pivotal market town. There were many industries involved with Bedford, such as brewing and brickmaking. The main industry was making wool, and lace making was introduced in the 1500s. Bedford is steeped in history, but was also being a town that 3 castles was destroyed, one being a fortress that was built by Edward the Elder, which was destroyed by the Danes. The second was a castle built by Henry I, but the castle was also destroyed when a baron had rebelled against the king at the time. And when the king had took the castle again, the castle was destroyed. The only thing left is the castle mound next to the river. The third castle was constructed during the reign of William II, between 1100 and 1130, but like the other castles, it was destroyed. The River Ouse passes through Bedford town, which has several gardens and memorials along the embankment, and those memorials are for those who had died during the wars. By mid-17th century, Bedford had a population of about 2,000 people, despite the 2 outbreaks of the plague in 1575-76 and 1578-79. There was a civil war between the king and the Parliament in 1643. The people of Bedford supported the Parliament, but that had gone sour when Royalists captured Bedford in October 1643. In the 19th century, there were substantial changes made, such as railways being made available. Also, living conditions were improved tremendously, such as commodities like gas, lighting, plumbing and sewage, but the sanitation was still unsatisfactory. There was 2 major cholera outbreaks in 1832 and 1849. The 20th century, there was a lot of industrial activities such as brickmaking and aircraft building. Farming was still one of the main sources of sustenance. The local culture had flourished and was also complemented by opening a library in 1935. During the 20th century, there was an art gallery built and called the Cecil Higgins Art Gallery. The Higgins family moved to Bedford in the 1820s. The head was Charles Higgins, who founded the brewery at Castle Lane and built a family house next to it. The family was successful and they were influential figures in town, as Charles Higgins was an incredibly good Liberal politician and the mayor of Bedford. The brewery remained in the Higgins family until the late 1920s, when Cecil Higgins had sold the Wells Wench to fund a museum, which happened to be the Cecil Higgins Art Gallery. The museum opened on the 25th of July 1949. Cecil Higgins founded the museum to house the collection he had of ceramics, glass and objects of art for the benefit, interest and education of the inhabitants and visitors of Bedford. In 2005, the Cecil Higgins Museum merged with the Bedford Museum, but it still had its separate buildings and identity till it closed in 2007 for redevelopment. The museum then reopened on the 21st of June 2013, now called Higgins Bedford Museum. The town Bedford has many different museums, like the Higgins Museum, such as the Bunyan Museum and the Panacea Society Museum. The Bunyan Museum is based on John Bunyan, a famous writer and preacher that was born in Elstow, just out of Bedford. Bunyan was born on November 1928. He had 6 children, 4 with his first wife and 2 more with his second wife. After his first wife died, his first child Mary was born blind. In 1644, Bunyan joined the army where he served as a garrison. He then returned to Elstow in 1647. John joined the newly reformed independent church. In 1660, Cromwell's protectorate ended and the monarchy was restored. It was believed at that time to get national unity, there needed to be religious uniformity. So the way they did that was restraining developing congregations and forbidding preaching. Bunyan was arrested for preaching to a congregation and was sentenced for 3 months, which was extended to 12 years because Bunyan had refused to give assurance that he would not preach. He was in jail for 1661 to 1672. Bunyan had several privileges as a prisoner since he was not an actual criminal during this time. He was allowed daily visits, and because the prison was only 5 minutes walk, his blind daughter brought food to him. He authored a few books such as Christian Behavior in 1663, The Holy Trinity in 1665, Grace Abounding in 1666. During the years 1667 to 72, Bunyan wrote the first part of the Pilgrim's Progress. The Panacea Society goes into the history of the cult that for 100 years old believed that they could cure all illnesses, live forever, and avert the impending apocalypse. The cult leader was Mabel Baltrop, a widowed former vicar's wife who came to believe in 1919 that she was the Messiah whom Shiloh prophesied in the New Testament book of Revelation. Mabel created a community that peaked at around 70 members in the 1920s and 1930s. Mabel renamed herself Octavia. She had campaigned for the Church of England to follow the instructions of another self-proclaimed prophet, Joanna Southcott. Joanna had died a century before that, but left a box full of prophetical writings stating that it should only be opened during a time of national crisis by all 24 Church of England bishops. Most of the archives in the Panacea collection relate to the period 1918 to the end of the 1930s. The archives contain info on the aims and objectives of the society and how it was run. Archives pre-1918 relate to personal papers of Mabel Baltrop and other Baltrop family members. Much of the material during this period consists of accounts of meetings, financial reports, administrative records, etc. Bedford is a town that holds a lot of history and floods into the town centre. It is also very highly populated with Italians since the World War II, when they moved from Italy to the UK to rebuild themselves. It is known that 60 years after the Second World War, that Bedford had the highest proportion of Italian residents in the UK. During 1958 and 85, the Bedford residents began to live in shared housing in the town centre instead of living in hostels or the war camps they were living in before. This caused property owners to take advantage of the situations. In 1956, the Parliament amended the Rents Act to protect foreign workers. They established a loan scheme and allowed brick workers to buy their own homes. In the 1960s, there were newspaper articles printed in Italian. Some workers left their brick factory and began to set up their own businesses. Some set up restaurants and bars that still stand up to today. Life was not easy for the Italians. There was discrimination towards the Italians from the English. Many Italians did not want to stay in Bedford for long. More than 60% of the first arrivals returned within 4 years. Younger generations of Bedford Italians tend to hold Italian passports but speak language less fluently.